Hello, I'm Dr. Manuel G. Saldivar. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a university faculty member. This video is one in a series associated with a textbook by Jeffrey Levy entitled Psychology, the Science of Human Potential. This is a free open source textbook that's available for anyone to use. A link to this textbook can be found below this video in the description box. The purpose of this video is not to cover every single point in the textbook. Rather, it's meant to give students an overview of the contents and the big ideas, the main themes of every particular chapter. So let's get started. Now, in the previous chapter, which was chapter 1, Levy introduced what we call in psychology the nature versus nurture debate. So as a reminder, nature refers to our heredity, to the genetic inheritance that's passed down to us from our ancestors via our DNA. Nurture refers to our individual life experiences as human beings. And if you have not seen it, the video on chapter 1 goes into some more detail about the exact shape and contours of this nature versus nurture debate. But the point for us here in this chapter is that nature versus nurture is useful as kind of a framework for a big question that a lot of science, especially life sciences like biology, medicine, and certainly psychology, are concerned with. The question being, what has a greater influence on our human behavior? What plays a bigger part in influencing how and why we behave as humans the way we do? Our heredity, our nature, or our nurture, the life experiences that we have as human beings. In this chapter, we're going to focus on the concept of nature. Specifically, what do we know about our heredity? What do we know about the biological aspects of how human beings develop in general, and especially how does that biological development affect the aspects of us that make us pretty much unique as a species on this planet, which is our brain, the human mind. The most significant aspect of heredity is evolution, which is the tendency of living creatures to change over time. The Levy chapter 2 that we're discussing in this video, goes into much more detail, but I just want to hit some of the high points here for us. You'll read in the Levy chapter that Charles Darwin was an English scientist who lived in the 19th century, the 1800s, and he is credited with popularizing, or being the one to kind of bring forward into the scientific community, the idea of evolution. He developed his own version, his own theory of evolution that he began to propagate, to talk about, to write about in the scientific community starting in about the mid-19th century. But there were scientists involved in laying the foundations for evolution both before and after Darwin. But as kind of a shorthand, we'll talk about, and you may see in other readings and even in other courses, the term Darwinian evolution. That's just meant to kind of describe the foundations or the beginning of our modern understanding. You'll hear and see in a number of readings, not just in this course, but in other courses you may take, biology, anatomy, for example, other science courses, discussions about Darwinian evolution. That's just kind of shorthand that we use in modern English to describe the rough ideas, the rough outline of evolution as first put forward by Charles Darwin and then added to and refined over many decades after him. For psychology students, for you all in this class, there are two main takeaways that I want you to keep in mind in terms of evolution. Why should we care about it? Why are we discussing it in a psychology class? First, it's important to keep in mind, to understand that all humans are subject to evolutionary pressures, just like all living creatures. We'll dig more into that in a moment. And second, evolutionary changes result both from natural selection as well as from random mutation. Natural selection is a term that refers to the way in which environmental factors, the stuff happening to us in the world around us, result in a situation where some characteristics will help a species survive, while in a different environment, those same characteristics, those same traits, may actually not help or even in some cases be hurtful in terms of the species being able to survive. Let me use an example from the past, from humans' own evolutionary history. There was a cousin, so these are not our ancestors, they were a cousin species of humanity that existed until about roughly 45,000 years ago, called Neanderthal men. Oftentimes in movies and TV shows, you'll see Neanderthals kind of depicted as a typical caveman, and more to the point, they're often incorrectly shown as being sort of brutes, more animalistic, not very smart. None of these things are true. First of all, Neanderthals certainly had physical differences in terms of appearance from modern humans, but if you saw a Neanderthal walking down the street and he or she had their hair combed, maybe was shaved, was wearing modern clothes, in many cases you probably would not take a second look because they would have a distinctive appearance, but they wouldn't necessarily look freakishly weird compared to modern humans. I'm bringing up Neanderthals because they are a good example of natural selection. Neanderthals had physical features that they evolved separately from modern humans for reasons I won't go into in this video. But because of their slightly separate evolution, Neanderthals had features that helped them survive in cold climates. They tended to have much larger noses than modern humans. A larger nose when you breathe, when you respirate, that helps you humidify the air that you're breathing. So if you live in a cold environment, it can be unhealthy or even damaging to your lungs to suck in a lot of cold air. So having a bigger nose warms that air before it reaches your lungs. Neanderthals also tended to have short, stout bodies, which help conserve body heat. Today, if you look at humans that live in extremely cold environments like the mountains of South America or the Inuit peoples, they used to be called Eskimos. That's not actually the correct term. Native peoples who live around the Arctic Circle tend to be short, stoutly built people. There are physical benefits to being short and stout in that it's easier for you to conserve body heat than someone who's tall and lanky and thinner. So Neanderthals were perfectly built to survive during an ice age. They could withstand cold better than modern humans. And so for that reason, during the ice age in the northern hemisphere that started about 100,000 years ago and it lasted through roughly 25 to 35,000 years ago, Neanderthals were able to survive. And not only survive, but live and thrive much better than modern humans because they were built for that environment. But then the Ice Age began to end, and modern humans began to move into the territory that previously had been the territory of Neanderthals. There was a lot of conflict. We know this because we found evidence, for example, of both humans and Neanderthals, their bones broken and shattered by clubs. We found skeletons that contained stone arrowheads. So there was a lot of fighting going on between humans and Neanderthals, although certainly there almost certainly were some peaceful interactions as well. But the point is, the environment began to change, the Ice Age began to end, and among other challenges Neanderthals faced, including having our ancestors, modern humans, showing up in their backyard, literally, they also suddenly found themselves in a world they had not really evolved to thrive in. And so that change, that end of the Ice Age, that ending of an environment that had been very favorable towards them to one that was at best neutral, maybe even unfavorable as the world warmed up, they were at a disadvantage. And so nature kind of selected them out. Their traits or characteristics didn't change so much as individuals, Neanderthals that had those traits and characteristics tended to be less likely to survive over time. More of them died because of these changing conditions. That means there were fewer Neanderthals left to propagate their species, to spread around their DNA, and over time they died out. So this is the idea of natural selection. Characteristics that were helpful for Neanderthals to survive the Ice Age suddenly became less helpful or even were created a disadvantage for them as the modern climate took over from the Ice Age. Now, the other component to evolution, besides natural selection, is random mutation, and that refers to a permanent change in the composition of the DNA of a particular gene. Again, the textbook will go into more detail about random mutation. The big point here is that there's a lot of reasons why mutation can occur, but again, the takeaway is that when mutation happens, that can create a change in the characteristics and the traits of a certain species, or sometimes multiple traits will change. But If these changes are neutral or beneficial, then that may, over the long term, help that species survive or even grow and spread. But a mutation can also be harmful. It can create a condition where the species now is at some kind of disadvantage compared to other species that it's competing against for food or for living space. And so that can also further be an element in evolution. And it's this combination of natural selection and mutation over time that has resulted in human beings having a nervous system that's not only optimized to operate our physical bodies, to keep our hearts beating and our lungs respirating, but the human nervous system has evolved under these very difficult conditions to optimize us to learn stuff. Humans are very good at learning new things, at remembering things, at being able to respond to the environment around us, at being able to solve problems. And this is why humans have become the dominant species on the planet, because we have better, more effective, more efficient brains than any living creature as far as we are aware of, at least on this planet. Levy introduces the basic elements of the human nervous system, and he discusses the structures, the human nervous system being a set of structures that transmit information regarding stimuli, or in the singular, if you haven't encountered this word before, singular stimulus, plural stimuli. This is stuff either from outside the world, or sometimes a stimulus can be internal. It can be a thought, it can be a reaction that we have. And this is something that prompts us to behave in a certain way. Please be sure you are being attentive about these basic concepts introduced in this chapter, chapter 2, about the nervous system, because they will come into play in more depth in chapter 3. That will be our next discussion. That concludes today's video. I hope you've found this overview helpful for your own studies. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this video useful. It really helps my YouTube channel grow. Good luck with your continuing studies of psychology, as well as with the rest of your college career. Take care.